Hello, so I'm back with another tips video for Puyo, and the idea in this one is that sometimes you'll be able to form another link pretty easily with the pieces you're drawing, but you actually shouldn't do that. And as I get into this video, you'll start to understand what I mean by that. But let's just look at this first example. So let's say you have this board state and you're drawing a double red next and then a red yellow. I think if you understand how to chain, you can probably see a way to continue your chain with these pieces. So you could put the double red here and the red yellow like this, and you don't even have to split. And now you've added another link to your chain, and you can keep going. It looks pretty nice. But as you might have guessed from the intro, I'm going to tell you why I think that's a bad idea in this situation. So if you do this, then you end up with a pretty big height difference here, so it becomes hard to use the space. So like if you kind of have to decide, you either have to do a really big split, or you kind of have to decide if you want to put something on the left side or the right side, but you can't really cross over and do both. So if you happen to not draw like yellows, let's say you draw blue, so you place the pieces. Now you draw blue, green, blue, green, and then you're like, well, what do you do with this? Because it's awkward to tell with the blue greens. Like you can try, but now you're starting to get really uneven. It's looking like you might have to throw away a lot of colors on the tail unless you get really good pieces. But if you don't get really good pieces, it's going to be really hard. So you could put it on the front too, but even that doesn't look very good. You're like running out of space. It's hard to trigger this if you wanted to do it on the left side because you don't have space to put like blue, blue, red. So even though you added a link here, the key point is that it's not very good because your board is really uneven. So rather than adding the link here, you'd be a lot better off if you actually use these on the tail. And there's a couple of different ways to do that. I'll show you one, or I'll show you a bunch actually, but this is one. So you would put a red and two yellows, and that's one way to do that. But if you were to do it like this, now let's say you draw blue, green, you could set it up like this so that you can continue building like this. But the thing is, when your board is in this state, it's flexible now. So if you drew even more reds, you could put them like this, like you were going to put the previous reds. Pretty much if you draw any color, so if you draw yellows, you could put them like this and then put the next color you get over here and then do something with that. It's a bit, you'll have to do like, it's simpler to understand if you do it like this. But because you were able to make your board more flat, you can like be more flexible with your next pieces. But if you instead forced another link over here, even though it's successfully extending your chain, in the current moment, it's making your chain really uneven and really hard to build, and you have no real flexibility in this shape. Now for the other types of tells you could go for, you could go for yellow next, except not in this situation where like you would want to put it like this, but the yellows would pop. And you could put it like this, but it's a bit uneven again. So you're building in a way that's uneven, so that's the same problem. And you could do this one, so either way you put it. And the goal here would be to do this and this. So again, the key theme is that you may have a way to easily create an extra link with the pieces you're getting, but you might not want to just build that link immediately. So let's look at another example. Here, if you have blue-red next, and then yellow-blue, you could continue building your chain like this, and now you've like you've completed your chain, and you just need the yellows. And it looks pretty good, but there's a problem here. So if you look at this spot, well, it can't be blue, and it can't be yellow, so it has to be green or red, but if it's green, even that's not good because it cuts. So it kind of has to be red. So so it's fine if you can get a red, but after you put these pieces down, you might not draw any reds. You might again draw like blue, green, green, yellow, and no reds. And now you're starting to get stuck because you're going to have to throw away pieces as you wait for a red, or like try to build on the tail maybe. And again, the big height difference is a problem, so you can't kind of cross over on both sides. You have to put them on one or the other. And then if you get bad pieces here, you can't do anything about it because of this column that you can't use unless you get a red at the bottom of it. So, uh, and for this one, the thing, like, it's tough, but you have to learn to be able to see these situations on your board where it's like, I can't put a blue here or a yellow here because there's three blues, three yellows touching this spot, so I need to cover this spot up with a different color. And even more so in this case, like I said, there's the cut on the greens, so you can't even put a green here. So mentally you have to be able to look at the board and see, okay, this is a spot where it's like I can't I have to put a red here. So you have to prioritize filling in that spot whenever you get the chance if you notice it. So if you can notice it, then you might be able to see something like this is a much better placement for the next piece. You could also do this, that would work too. But then you can continue on. You have multiple ways to place the yellow blue. You could do this one. And now your board is flat and really flexible. There's only one spot where you have to watch out for because you can't put a blue here. That's okay because you could put even like double blue over here. So that's not a problem. You could put reds here. You could put greens here. You could put yellows in places. So no matter what color you get, because you're now flat and stable and you don't have any color conflicts anywhere, you can pretty much use every color you get, and it'll be a lot easier to build up from here as opposed to how it was when you kind of lock it in but have that color conflict in this column. So here it's very difficult to build because you don't want to put greens here, you can't put blue or yellow. So it's like one small decision, but putting the first red you get here immediately has a huge impact on how well you can build from this state on. And it's one of those things that's very easy to miss because if you're really focused on building a chain link by link, you're going to be looking at this and you want to build this link and you want to build this link. But by doing that, you're missing the problem in the middle column where you need a red here. So now for a couple of other examples, this one has a lot of exposed groups of three. So if you draw a lot of reds and yellows, it becomes very hard to place them. So if you leave your board like that and just extend your chain and build up the links, so for example, blue, red, and red, yellow, you now have a really solid, complete chain, but the exposed reds and the yellows to some extent too are going to cause a problem with chain building. So, for example, if you drew red, green, it becomes hard to place pieces because you would kind of want to do a green tail like this, but you can't really do that. At best, you could do, so if you're clever, you could do this type of build, but now you're starting to get really big height differences in the column, so even this is like not very good, and the red's also cut here. So that's another problem, but um, so you can't really do that. You could try and do this, although it's not clear, like you need something to fill up this column, and then maybe you can extend that way. But until you get that something, you still have a problem because you might get more like reds and you can't place them into the column, and then you have to start like throwing them away on the sides, and you won't be able to use the space efficiently. So what I'm trying to say is that this board state is can be really tough to work with just because of all the exposed groups of three. So if you were able to cover those up with a different color, even just a little bit, it would give you a lot more flexibility. So here, if you cover it up with a blue, you still have a lot of exposed reds, but there's no longer like in this shape, you can't put a red on the bottom or on the top. So that's even an even tougher condition. Like you can't put it on the side, top, you can't put it anywhere. So it's an even tougher condition. But if you do like this, for example, and then you go back to saying like, okay, what if you got red, green, red, green? It's no longer a problem because you can extend like this, for example, and then next piece, if you got yellows, you could try and extend like this, for example. But you're now a lot more flexible and you're a lot more able to handle whatever colors come next because you kind of blocked off the exposed group of three here. So this column is no longer like tough to fill in. So it's something where, again, if you're just building a chain, a lot of times you focus really hard on how do I complete another link? How do I add another link in? But it can become easy to miss looking at the entire board state where it's like, okay, this column is going to be tough to use because I can't put a red or a yellow here, so I need to put a different color in here before it becomes a problem and I don't draw that color. So um, I guess one thing that I can say I've noticed when I practice is that if I try to build attacks, a lot of times I can also build better main chains too, which always seemed weird, but I think this is the reason why, because when you build an attack, you have to fill in the spots on your board to like build the attack up. And then as you do that, you're starting to fix the problems of like not being able to use certain columns because of color conflicts. So if you can be aware of that kind of thing, it can really help you build, like in this example, if you just build really straightforwards and then you don't get the right colors next, like I said, if it's red, green, and maybe double yellow, well, you can't put the yellow here either, so maybe you put the yellows here, and then maybe you get green, yellow, you can't put the yellow here, so it's like you're gonna have to throw away a lot of pieces. A lot of that just gets fixed if you can see it in advance and block it off with a different color faster. Now for one last example of that, or not exactly of that, this last one is more about adjusting for the next piece. with the current piece you're placing. So to do this at full speed is quite a bit more difficult than some of the other examples, but it is something that high level players can do pretty consistently. So if you ever see like um, a really strong player get a board with like a bunch of one color, but they somehow manage to build perfectly despite having like a flood of one color everywhere. A big reason behind that is because they're able to adjust the placement of the current piece to better suit the next piece. So here, if you're just blindly making a chain, it would make sense to put the blue yellow like this, but now with the double red, there's no real good spot for it. Everywhere you put it would kind of pop something that you want to keep. So you could put it like this, but now you're starting to get stuck where it's like you need blues here, or you really want a blue here to cover this spot so that you could try and force an extension maybe like this, but you're starting to get really like, in order to get this extension you need so many perfect colors and perfect pieces, otherwise you're like not going to get it off. You could go for this, but again, this too, you have to get 3 greens for that. If you don't get that, you're getting stuck. But the problem isn't that the what happens after the you place the double red. It's what happened before you place the double red. So you could change your placement of the blue yellow. For example, this would be pretty good, I think. And there's other ways you could place it too, but this covers the exposed groups of 3, and you can make a tail like this, or you could try and turn it into a second transition. But now you can place the double reds here, and now you can you have a lot more flexibility to adjust with whatever colors come. So if you draw a lot of greens, you could like commit to an extension that way. But if you draw blues, you could tell, or you could extend this way. And if you draw yellows, well, it's not a problem. And if you draw more reds, it would depend on what colors they're attached to. You might be able to build a head like this and maybe put a different color. But by adjusting to make better use of the double reds that you see coming, you could have a better board state afterwards. And there's a lot of different examples I could show for this. This is just one of them, but this is an example of how you might want to change where you're placing your current piece so that you can use the next piece better and have a better board state when you place the next piece. So to kind of summarize it all, even though you can immediately make a new link a lot of times on the front of your chain, but this happens on the back of your chain as well too. Even though you can make a new link immediately, you might not want to do that, and you might want to focus more on keeping your board's state more balanced and more flat so that you can be more flexible, or you might want to look to cover exposed groups of 3 or places where your chain might cut rather than just making another link. So here too, you might want to cover up some of the exposed groups of 3 so that your board is more balanced. And you might want to adjust so that you can use the next piece better. So if you've ever like practiced chain building and felt like when you really focus on chaining, it sometimes doesn't work out very well and you can't make good chains, this might be the reason why. So this is something you should really try and focus on and make sure you're paying attention to as you build chains, where even if you can make a link, you might not want to do it.